Hey everybody, so we are in a place called Morlatton Village. I will turn this around so you guys can see this. There's actually four really cool houses, including the White Horse Tavern and I believe there's the inn, and then down a little bit further is the George Douglas House. He's the guy that's actually who Douglasville is named after him. But anyways, there's a bunch of really cool, like I said, number of different houses, like four of them, and this was, I guess, the original Douglasville. Or Morlatton. So anyways, let's turn this around and check this out. This was settled originally in 1704. Hey, welcome to Morlatton Village, because I guess the R is silent. In 1701, William Penn granted 10,000 acres of land to 17 colonists of Swedish descent who were living in present-day Philadelphia. The village within the Swedes' tract was called Morlatton, and in 1719 the entire tract became Annville Township, the first municipality in Berks County. The origin of the name Morlatton or Morlatton, its original spelling, is unknown, but may have been derived from a name it was given by its earlier Native American inhabitants, the Lenape. And here you can just sort of see the different homes here. And then Morlatton was a diverse community settled by Swedes, Scots, and Welsh, Ulstermen from Northern Ireland, Netherlands, Dutch, including a partly Polish family, Germans, and English. A few Morlatton area families held African American slaves. Because of its location at the crossroads along the Skookul River, Morlatton became a thriving community during the 18th century, a popular meeting place and center of commerce. Four of the original Morlatton village structures remain today, maintained and preserved by the Historic Preservation Trust of Berks County. Now let's go over to the very first of these. This here is the White Horse Inn, established in 1762. You just see how this brownstone, and let's take a peek. They have a sign for each of the individual homes so you can do sort of a self-guided tour. They actually have QR codes as well that'll actually take you to a website and go through a lot of other stuff. So the White Horse Inn, circa 1763, a wayside inn. The first innkeepers of the White Horse tract were Swedish settler Marcus Hulling and his wife Margareta, a daughter of Mouns and Jones, the area's earliest European settlers. The Hullings Inn was established in the 1720s, probably in their house near the riverbank. By 1750 and well into the next century, the White Horse was a prominent public house in southeastern Berks County, appearing on the Skookul, Pennsylvania maps of 1759 and 1775, and on the infamous 1776 British spy map of southeastern Pennsylvania. George Douglas purchased the White Horse Inn site in 1762. The earliest section of the existing inn, the three bays on the right, which would be this side over here, was completed by 1763. The addition to three bays on the left, which would be on the far side, was probably constructed between 1798 and 1805. While operating nearby Amity Country Store, George Douglas I and his son George Douglas II leased the inn to a succession of innkeepers through the early decades of the 19th century. The last public reference to the White Horse as a tavern stand appeared in George Douglas II's 1832 will. As a wayside inn, the White Horse accommodated teamsters, livestock drovers, stage drivers, and other travelers on the King's roads connecting Philadelphia to Reading and Oley. As a country tavern stand, it served beer, ale, wine, spirits, and meal to workmen, farmers, and others from the growing crossroads community. Prices were fixed in 1700 by provincial law. A meal of pork or beef with small beer was 7 pence. Hay or grass for a horse was 6 pence per night, including lodging for the horsemen. This is an earliest 20th century, so 1900s southwestern perspective from right where we are, the White Horse Inn, after a conversion to apartments. White Horse Inn played an important historical role in the Amity region as a civic, social, economic, and cultural gathering place. During the Revolutionary War, it was primary assembly site for militia musters. Samuel Jones, a grandson of Mouns Jones, mustered here with a local battalion in August 1776 before marching to Philadelphia. In addition to providing an arena for political discourse, the inn was a polling place, a venue for auctions of real and personal property. and the meeting place for Amity Township Society for the Prevention of Horse Thievery. The inn became the hub of America's original form of social networking, tavern table conversation, and distribution of news of the day through German and English language newspapers. The tavern keeper also dispatched and received letters and served as a point of contact for people who posted broadside notices and advertisement in regional newspapers. Unlike most country taverns at the time, the White Horse presented an elegant facade constructed of coarse and fully dressed out stone, not unlike Douglas's nearby Georgian home. The interior plan was typical for smaller inns with just 2 first-floor rooms without hallways in the original section and 1 cage bar room in the later Federal-era wing. The proprietors' quarters and dormitory rooms for guests were on the 2nd floor. By the earliest 20th century, the structure was converted to apartments, and the Historic Preservation Trust acquired it in 1971 and has restored its original floor plan. The building now houses the Trust's administrative offices and archiving center and stands as a welcome venue for all that are interested in the preservation of American landmarks. And there you can see the one room in the front room of the tavern. Another piece of hometown history. Just sort of set up as it would have been. They would have had a bunch of the flowers and all the other stuff here, but this is just stunning building. 1762. This has been around for a long time. So Morlatton Village, an 18th century crossroads. Located along a ford on the Skookul River, Morlatton Village was established in the early 18th century with the arrival of Mouns Jones and his family from modern Philadelphia. Others soon followed, becoming part of a diverse regional settlement encompassing the present-day townships of Amity, Union, Douglas, and Oley, and the borough of Birdsboro. In addition to homes and plantation, the newly arrived settlers established businesses and industries which supported the local economy and provided goods and services to residents. Iron forges and grist mills took advantage of the area's natural resources and rich farmlands. Here you just get a general idea of the map of back then. Oley Hills. While roads were built to connect them, all of these roads intersected at Morlatton, and it became a crossroads from which travelers could easily reach Philadelphia, Reading, and the Oley Valley, and other mills, forges, and settlements in northern Chester County. An example of the region's diversity is the first Morlatton Church. It was built by the earliest settlers, mostly of Swedish descent, on land donated by Mouns Jones in 1719. For a period of time, it was one of the few churches in the area and drew attendance from people of varied national and regional or religious backgrounds, including Anglicans, Lutherans, and Calvinists. Ministers often preached first in English and then in German so everyone could understand. Henry Melchior Muhlenberg was among those who preached there, remarking in his journal on the diversity of Morlatton's residents. In 1753, the church officially became Anglican and is now St. Gabriel's Episcopal Church, which stands nearby on the south side of US 422. Its picturesque burial ground is the final resting place for many of the earliest residents of Morlatton and the surrounding area. Morlatton Village remained a crossroads throughout the 18th century. In the early 19th century, the center of the neighborhood began to shift northward to the course of present-day US 422. The village of Douglasville began to develop, and Morlatton became the quiet, well-preserved hamlet that it remains today. And here it is. This is the George Douglas. I guess it was a store and his home. And we'll go over to this sign over here, and then we'll go down to the last 2 homes, including the oldest home, I believe, in Berks County. George Douglas House, 1765. It's a country manor. George Douglas, 1726 to 1799, was from a prosperous Chester County farm family. After working as a saddler and innkeeper in Reading, he moved to Morlatton by 1762 with his wife, Mary Pearsall Douglas, 1731 to 1798. Douglas soon became a prominent member of the community, and in 1764 was appointed Justice of the Peace for Amity and vicinity. On July 2nd, in 1776, he became a captain of the Amity Region Militia Company in the Flying Camp Division of the Revolutionary Troops under George Washington's command. A member of the Church of England, Douglas also served as on the vestry of nearby St. Gabriel's Church from 1763 to 1768 and was buried in its churchyard in 1799. In 1762, Douglas acquired the White Horse Inn and leased it to a succession of innkeepers while he operated a successful country store, which would have been right here. The Douglas or Amity store played a key role in the region's economy for many years. Douglas and his son George Douglas II, 1767 to 1733, sold imported and locally handcrafted goods including tobacco, rum, Bibles, spices, chocolate, construction materials, needlework supplies, bolts of fabric, and an abundance of sundries. Store ledgers record cash and barter transactions with local residents, including Michael Fulp, descendants of Mouns Jones, Boone family members, and iron masters from the Potts, Rudder, and Bird family. The Douglases also traded in commodities including agricultural produce and bar iron, transported to Philadelphia by wagon or boat. The Amity store ceased operations after 1834, after the acquisition of most of the land and buildings in the village by George Douglas II and establishment of a post office in the Douglas Amity store in 1829. The community became known as Douglasville. The Douglas house and its additions were built in several stages. The 1765 house consists of 5 bays, which I'm assuming that is probably the far end here, farthest away, because then you can see there's a slight difference there, especially up at the top. It goes from like a brown to a white, which would differentiate between the oldest area and a newer area. 5 bays delineated by window and door openings, a provincial and mid-century example of a Georgian mansion. The house features a center hallway and 4 corner room rooms on each floor. The exterior of the house is distinguished by fine detail such as squared, coursed, and dressed sandstone blocks and keystone flat arches on the facade, and a plaster cove cornice under the eaves. The 2-story addition with its loft door to accommodate the store operation was probably built between 1790 and 1800. The 1-story addition, which includes a smokehouse over a barrel vaulted root cellar, which would be right here. So underneath there is a root cellar. Probably completed in the early 19th century. Only traces of an early fireplace and massive stone chimney remain at the addition's gable end. The George Douglas house and its additions remained in the family estate until 1944. In the first half of the 20th century, the buildings housed tenant Wilmer Miller's barbershop, a corner grocery, and a butcher shop. In 1988, the house was acquired by the Historic Preservation Trust of Berks County, which has stabilized the structure and is engaged in long-term preservation efforts. And that is the George Douglas house and country store. Here we are at the 3rd house. This is the Michael Fulp House in 1783. It's a humble dwelling. This modest stone house was built for Michael Fulp, 1743 to 1808, around 1783. Unlike the mansions owned by Fulp's wealthier neighbors, such as the Douglas family just up the lane, it offers insight into the lives of the local working people of the 18th century. Fulp's name first appears in the Amity tax rolls of 1773, where he is described as a landless single freeman. During the Revolutionary War, he was enrolled as private militia in the local militia, the 5th Company, 5th Battalion, commanded by Captain Joseph Sands, which was mustered from Amity Township. Around 1783, Michael Fulp had his stone house built on a 3/4 acre lot purchased from his neighbor, blacksmith John Curlin. He was one of the few Ole Valley working people to establish a homestead by acquiring a parcel of land, but he remained one of the many ordinary men who worked with their hands at whatever labor was available to them. He provided for himself and sometimes for his mother. Records from the nearby Douglas Amity store show that he assisted with crop harvesting and grain threshing. In addition to hauling dung, haymaking, woodcutting, and butchering livestock for store credit, his estate inventory included a chisel and a brace and bit tools which would have been used by a carpenter. That skill is confirmed by store records from the early 1790s, which show Fulp also received store credit for working boards. For 10 years, Michael Fulp owned and farmed 40-acre plantation in nearby Douglas Township, living there while renting out the Morlatton House. No longer laboring only for others, he was now a farmer working his own land. Although he no longer owned a Douglas Township property at the time of his death, his status in the community had been permanently elevated to that of a yeoman farmer, as recorded in land and estate records following Fulp's death in 1808. George Douglas II added the stone cottage at Morlatton to his extensive holdings on May 14, 1808. Michael Fulp was buried in a cemetery at nearby St. Gabriel's Church. The Fulp House originally consisted of 2 rooms on the main floor with an open attic loft and with cellar space under one half of the building. The main floor included a fireplace for cooking, and until the mid-20th century had a stove chimney at the opposite gable end. In the mid-20th century, the Fulp House became commonly known as the Bridgekeeper's House. There is no official record of a bridgekeeper, but according to oral tradition, a woman named Alice Garber, who lived in the Fulp House at the time, was known to sweep the bridge and maintain its lights until it was removed in 1951. The Fulp House was acquired by the Historic Preservation Trust of Berks County in 1965 through a gift of the Roy Scher family. During 2010 to 2011, the trust completed extensive repair and restoration of the building, which has been imperiled by repeated flooding from the Skookul River. Michael Fulp's house stands strong today, a lasting record of the type of home built by the common man in the 18th century. So let's go check it out, and then we will check out what is the oldest house in Berks County. This is so cool. You see these places and just how well built they were. And it's just really, really stunning. So a place like this is still here today because of the preservation and the work that people put into making sure that these places are preserved. So right down there is the Skookul River, and it's a riverside settlement and covered bridge that used to be here. Skookul River played an important role in the settlement and growth of Amity and Union Township. A shallow crossing at the location allowed people and wagons to ford the river, and may have been one reason Mouns Jones elected this site for his homestead. Thomas Millard's Mill, 1712 to 1714, was in operation about 1/2 mile downriver in the opposite bank from Mouns Jones and other Monottawny plantations. I know I messed that one up. Farmers and millers used shallow draft boats to take produce to Philadelphia when river conditions permitted. They were soon joined by other iron masters who boated pig iron and specialized ironwork downriver for purchase. Although subject to frequent flooding, the river provided a source of fish and served as a means of transportation. The river was an essential resource for local prosperity, but could sometimes be a source of controversy. During the 1730s, there was a considerable ill feeling and even rioting between boatmen and shore-based fishermen. Obstructive weirs and racks were erected by fishermen along stretches of the river, sometimes causing boats to overturn, resulting in the loss of cargo. This river crossing and the White Horse Inn at Morlatton soon became popular destinations for settlers traveling in the area. In the 1760s, the Amity store, established by George Douglas, added to the attraction. Here you can actually see some of the flooding coming up around these 2 homes. And there is, since 1951, the dismantling of the covered bridge that once went across here. After more than a century of shallow water crossings, the first bridge spanning the White Horse Ford was constructed in 1832 by Douglasville Bridge Company under the supervision of 6 commissioners, including George Douglas II. The 2-lane covered toll bridge, 340 feet long, 24 feet wide, was constructed on the patented Burr Arch truss system. The timber structure was supported by 3 massive stone piers, and the bridge company rebuilt the bridge after disastrous floods in 1850 and 1869. Berks County purchased the bridge in 1885, ending the tolls, but after substantial flood damage in 1902 and 1909, it was finally closed to vehicles in 1950 and dismantled in the summer of 1951. So I don't know if down here somewhere there is those stone. I sort of think that probably right there, yeah, they took the stones down, but this is where the cover bridge would have went across. You can see that thing in the center there. Let me zoom in, where that would have been one of the bases of one of the 3 stone piers. Quite cool. Really is an impressive structure. This would be the Mouns Jones House, which is the oldest in Berks County. Oldest standing structure, I believe. It says it's the oldest documented house in Berks County, 1716. Mouns Johansson, 1663 to 1727, was descended from Swedes who settled in present-day Philadelphia along the lower Delaware and Skookul Rivers. Later known as Mouns Jones, he was the first European settler in what would eventually become Berks County. In 1701, William Penn granted tracts of lands along the Skookul River to 17 Swedes in what is now Amity Township. Mouns Jones was only one of the 17 grantees to settle on one of the tracts of lands, establishing his plantation by around 1704. The Delaware Valley's early Swedish settlers were a nautical people who depended on the region's rivers for travel and livelihood. Each of the Swedes' tracts had river frontage, and it was typical that Mouns and his wife, Ingeborg, established their home on the river bank. Their tract, though narrow, extended several miles inland. The area where Mouns and Ingeborg, probably mispronouncing it, Jones settled with their 6 children eventually became known as Morlatton. Their first home was probably a log house. This stone house was constructed in 1716, a date permanently recorded by a remarkable date stone on the riverside wall of the house, which that's a wood carving rendering the original date stone. Swedish settlers had been gradually adopting a more English way of life, and the house reflects that transition. It is laid out on a hall parlor plan and constructed in a style reminiscent of the Pennsylvania's English Quaker settlers, with corner fireplace, which would be this one right over here, and a cooking fireplace was constructed at the northeast or northwest gable end of the house, which would be on the other side there. Although the house may seem modest to modernized, it was a substantial mansion by 1716 standards. Mouns Jones and his extended family became important members of the fledgling community. Prosperous farmers, they collaborated with other local leaders such as the Boone family, and that'd be Daniel Boone, a former fur trader. Mouns Jones entertained delegations of Native Americans and arranged conferences held at his farmstead between provincial officials and Native American leaders. The family of Mouns Jones owned the homestead until 1745, when his son Andrew sold it. The property changed hands several more times until 1965, when the Historic Preservation Trust of Berks County acquired the house through a gift of the Roy Scher family, with the stipulation that it be restored. On January 21st, 1974, the house was placed on the National Register of Historic Places. You can see in several states. And that is the Mouns Jones homestead, 1716. So with that, I want to say thanks for coming along. The Morlatton Village here. This is pretty cool to see these old stone homes that are from all back in the 1700s. But as always, I want to say thanks for coming along, and we'll see you all about town.